All right, just getting everything set up. Okay. Well, today I just wanted to do a couple of things. One is review the primary matters assignment, just to go over that again and remind you guys of what is required for that assignment, and then answer any questions you have of your passage about the assignment, or just any questions you might have at all. And then the second thing I wanted to do was give an update for the schedule and regarding the preaching assignment, to preach the sermon. So I'd like to do those two things today, if we can. All right. So that's the plan. So let's just take a quick look at the assignment. It's assignment number 6 for your Proverbs passage. And again, I'm going to use Proverbs 1, 8 through 19 as an example for us to use for this assignment. And this assignment includes the last few steps of the um, exegetical process that we covered in class. All right. And if you want to go back and get all the details, I've got here the sessions 11, 12, and 13, and there's the video link that you can access to go back and look at those assignments to review if you need to. And in those sessions, I covered the following 5 steps. All right, and this is what you'll have for your primary matters. All right, the first step is to consult resources. Okay, now that you've done the background context of the book, the poetic analysis, where you looked at parallelism and imagery and figurative language, and you've done the diagram and the word studies. Now you're ready to consult the resources. And I put some in the teacher's manual where you can, or look at session 11 of the workshop for some of the types of resources that can be helpful for you, especially the online resources. And then, so just what I want you to do on this step is you read through those resources and you take from them what is helpful for understanding your passage. And what I want you to put down for this step is just tell me what resources you use. You don't have to put all the information that you got from them. Just tell me what resource it was. So put in, identify the author, the title, if it was a book, the page numbers, or the web link to it. All right. I just want to know what resources you consulted for this. Okay. And then list those down. And then after that, the next step is, now that you've done all of the study, you've gotten input from the resources, identify the authors, what, why, and how. And again, remember, the what is the subject of the poem. So let's summarize the poem in a sentence. That's the what. What is the author? What is his main point or main idea? And then secondly, the why is, why did he address this particular subject? Like we, in every passage, right, there's the thing that is said, and then there's the reason that the author said it. And so that's what the author's what and why refer to. What did he say? And again, don't just say, the subject, the what of the poem is wisdom. Okay, that's just a topic. That's not what the author said. What did he say about wisdom? What particular, because we're talking about Proverbs, right? What particular part of wisdom, or maybe it was something else. Maybe he was talking about sexual purity or anger or something like that. So don't just say one word topic. Summarize the main point of the poem in a sentence. The author calls us to wisdom so that we would avoid, or calls us to heed wisdom from the scriptures. And then the why might be so that we can avoid um, bad consequences or something like that. But the what is going to be in a short sentence. What is the main point of the poem? And then the why is going to be, what is that reason that the author gives that main point? Okay, and then how is simply the outline. And usually with a poem, you'll go by stanza. Now, many of you guys, the Proverbs passage you had, I just gave you one stanza. So what you're going to want to do there is is try to identify within that stanza maybe 2 or 3 outline points that the author seems to make. And I'll show you from my example. Okay? So again, that's the author's what, why, how. It's the same thing we did for epistles. It's the same thing you did for the narrative, and then also for your Psalms passage. Okay? Any questions on that? We'll look at an example in a minute, but that's just hopefully that makes sense. Just reviewing here. Okay. All right. Now, so once you've identified the author's what, why, and how, again, that's from the author. It's not our sermon outline yet. That's just from the passage. What is the author's main point and his outline? After you've done that, then you need to identify any of the timeless truths in the passage. These are any doctrinal principles that you see in the text. And often there will be several of them. All right. And again, you can get more details from session 12 of the workshop or from the teacher's manual, page 39. But basically, it is those truths that apply at any time for any person, at any place, in any culture. All right. That's why they're called timeless truths. And so, what are those truths in your passage that are applicable, that apply to anyone at any place at any time? All right. And one thing that you can do for this step is, and I'll mention it in a little bit, the Biblical Doctrines book that by John MacArthur. It's helpful to go and look in the index of that book as well and look for your passage. So if you're preaching from Proverbs 2, 1-8, for example, is to go to the Biblical Doctrines book and look up your passage. And then you can, from that, it'll give some page numbers in the book that might cover some doctrinal truth that's in your passage. Okay? So that's part of identifying the timeless truths. What are those doctrinal principles that apply to anyone in any place at any time? And that is what I want you to note in this step. Okay, and usually there's 5 or 6 or maybe a few more that you can find. All right. Okay, any questions on timeless truths? After that, and this is an important step that I want to make sure you guys remember to do, and that is call it reflection. We'll just spend some time now. This is more of a personal step where look at the passage. You understand now what the author is saying and what the principal timeless truths are. At this point, it's now step back and just think about how that passage applies to you. And ask the Lord to, as you think about the various truths within that passage, what does the Lord bring to your mind? It's a meditation, really. It's pondering the text, not coming up with application, not thinking about your sermon, not trying to figure out an outline. This is where you just prayerfully ask the Lord to work on your own heart from what you have studied and learned. Okay, and I say spend at least 30 minutes. I think it's better to spend as much time as you can. This is a really important step that a lot of preachers don't do, frankly. They want to get right to once they study the passage, they want to get to, writing the sermon and getting ready to preach the sermon. But we have to remember first that we are not just doctors who prescribe a medication. We actually need the medication ourselves too, right? And so this step is meant to be a way to allow the Lord to work on our own hearts as we think about the particular passage. And I have found it to be very helpful when I think about later applications, and there are things that come out of the meditation process that are actually helpful in preaching the sermon as well. But the focus here is not the sermon. The focus is on my own soul and reflecting on what I've learned from the passage. And then I ask you guys just to summarize those thoughts in a paragraph. You don't have to write down everything you prayed about or thought about, but just give a few thoughts from this time of reflection. Maybe one or two things that you see in your own life, maybe some particular thing that you prayed. And then for this step as well, I will often then pray not only for myself, but then also for my hearers. And just that God would prepare their hearts, that He would allow me to speak clearly, that they would understand and apply this message. Then I might think of specific people to pray for in that regard too. Okay, but that's the focus here. It's not on what I'm going to preach, but it's on what is this text, how does it impact me, and then prayerfully asking the Lord to help it impact your hearers. Okay? All right, and then now, after all those steps, after reflecting on the passage, now you're ready to work on the sermon. And so I ask you to, for the next step, is to create the sermon concept and outline. And again, remember, the sermon concept is simply just the main point of the sermon, the propositional statement, the theme of the passage, the main idea of your particular poem, your particular passage. Okay? And the key here and the goal is to state that main point in a short and clear statement, a memorable statement. And the same for the outline point. Okay, nothing new here. This is what we've been doing for all of the sermons so far. You can consult session 13 of the workshop if you want to review how to come up with the sermon concept and outline. Again, the author's What, Why, How is a great guide for us to that. The what and the why can help inform that sermon concept, that main point. And then the how, from what the author, is something then you can use as your outline as well. Just make it directed towards your hearers. Don't say, Solomon says, make it more focused on what your hearers need to do in response, okay? So that's the 5 parts to the primary matters that I want you guys to include in this particular assignment. It's the same as assignment number 5 for your psalm. So also you can look at your own assignment that you did for your psalm passage, and that can also help remind you of these things, okay? I'm going to go through an example in a minute, but before I do that, is there any questions that you guys have from reviewing these 5 particular steps for your assignment? Everything's okay? All right. So here's what I have for my passage in Proverbs. Maybe let's go ahead and read it, just to remind ourselves of the text here. Okay. All right. I'm just going to ask Pastor German if you could read verses 8 through 11, and John verses 12 to 15, and then Pastor Ramil if you could read verses 16 to 19. Okay. Can't quite hear you, German. Is your microphone working okay?
Na German, wala mo ma-on ang mic.
Your microphone?
Okay.
There
Now,
we go.
can you hear? Okay. Thank you. Verse 8, hear my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Indeed, they are graceful wreath to your head and ornaments about your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause.
Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, even whole, as those who go down to the pit. We will find all kinds of precious wealth. We will fill our houses with spoil. Throw in your lot with us. We shall all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your feet from their path.
For their, for their feet run to evil, and they hasten to shed blood. Indeed, it is useless to spread the baited net in the sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives. So they're the ways of everyone who gains by violence. It takes away the life of its possessors.
Okay, good, thank you. So this is the passage, verses 8 through 19, that I use and I have been using for the example in our assignment. And as we go back from this passage, then the next step in the process is consult resources. And this is what I have for that. All right, just to show you by way of example, I have a few links from material I found on the web. And these are also, I would just encourage you can look in these two websites in particular, the Tom Constable's notes and the PlanoBibleChapel.org. Look up your passage there. And then also the Bible.org. There'll probably be some reference there to your Proverbs text. And then I noted a few commentaries that I referenced, and I just put the page numbers down. Again, on a separate document, I include all of my notes that I learned from these resources. All right, so you should be writing down anything from these resources that is helpful for you in studying the passage and understanding it. But for the assignment that I'm asking, I'm just asking for the references. So you should have your notes where you copied or written or summarized some of the whatever helpful insights you gained from these resources. I also included for my word study, had this resource, the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, and then there's 3 sermons that I listened to that are on this passage, so I included those as well from for resources. All right, so you can see there's many different kinds of resources. You could also have Bible encyclopedias. You could have blog articles. Of course, you could have commentaries on the web or commentaries, hard copies of those, or sermons. Okay, all of those will be resources that you can use. For your passage, I'd encourage you, Grace Church has a lot of good sermons that you can listen to. Probably will have your passage. And then sometimes sermonaudio.com is another one I might use once in a while for sermons. But there you have to be a little more careful because it could be anybody can preach on sermonaudio.com. They just have to pay the website a certain fee, and then they'll take your sermon. All right, so be careful with that one. But gracechurch.org is a good resource for sermons. Okay, so that's all I'm asking for on the consult resources step. Again, you should be writing your own notes from what you glean and learn from these resources, but for the assignment, just give me the resource that you use. Okay? All right? Questions? All right. Now the key step is after you've done all of that study is the author's what, why, how. And so here, notice I summarized, this is for the Proverbs 1, 8 through 19 passage that we just read. Basically, the main thought here is to heed wisdom's warning, not to go with sinners who entice you. All right, now remember, this is just the author's what. So I'm not making it real fancy, or this isn't my sermon concept. This is just summarizing the author's main point. Okay? Now, when I come up with the sermon concept, then I will make this point more directed to my hearers. I'll focus it more. I'll make it more succinct. But I don't just put wisdom, and I don't just put wisdom's warning. Notice I said, heed wisdom's warning, not to go with sinners who entice you. And then the why, because there are serious consequences if you do. That's what Solomon points out. And then in my particular passage, I did have more than one stanza. And so I had three stanzas in my particular passage. And so I summarized each one. Again, this is the author's outline. So I summarized the first stanza, heed God's wisdom through parents. The second stanza is do not follow the enticement of sinners. And then third is the consequences of sin. All right. So those are just summaries of the author's. These are the stanzas from the author's outline. Okay. Now, if you just have one stanza, which I think many of you do, just look for perhaps within that stanza there might be a particular focus, different focus in some of the verses compared to the others. All right. So some of you who taught from Psalm 119 had that issue where you only had one stanza. And so there, just sort of look to see if there's, so we could look, for example, Proverbs 2. Let's look at Proverbs 2 together as an example. Can't remember if any of you guys had Proverbs 2, but if you do, then you're going to want to listen close. Okay? So here we have my son, if you receive my words, treasure my commandments within you, make your ear attentive to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding. If you cry for discernment, lift your voice for understanding. Notice he's still with the if you seek her as silver, search for as hidden treasures, then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God, for the Lord gives wisdom. So notice here, this is all one stanza, verses 1 through I think 8 was the passage. But notice there's the first 4 verses are the if. My son, if you do this, if you receive, if you make your ear attentive, if you cry for discernment, if you seek your silver. And then notice verse 5 is the then. See that? So you could preach this passage in with there's two points. There's the if and then the then. Verses 1 to 4, if you pursue wisdom or something with diligence, something like that. Verses 5 through 8 is the result of pursuing wisdom diligently. Okay? So even though this is technically one stanza, verses 1 through 8, you can still see sort of a two parts to it. Okay? And so all of you can just do the same thing with your particular passage. If you have one stanza, just maybe look within the stanza and see if there's a different focus within it. All right. Now, if you have a specific question about your passage on that, go ahead and ask me now, and then we can look at it together. Does anybody have a question on your passage and the outline of it, the author's outline? Okay. Okay. So that's the author's what, why, and how. Now what you want to do is, as I mentioned, the next step is to identify the timeless truths. And here are some. I came up with 5 from my particular passage in Proverbs 1. And notice here, I just put the principle. For example, God intends parents to be a source of wisdom for their children. And I note the verse that comes from. And then I put here just a little cross-reference. Another passage that expresses that principle. All right, you don't have to do that, but I did that because I might use that in my sermon later. So this is just, sometimes I try to look for another passage or two that teaches that particular timeless truth that I noticed. Okay. And then secondly, in the passage it talks about the enticement is the riches that sinners will tempt you with. And so I just reminded me of greed, the love of money, and what it leads to. Okay, and so again, these are five truths I came up with from the text. There's probably more there, but these are the ones that I noticed in the passage. So that's all something for you to do as well. Just identify those timeless truths, those doctrinal principles within your text. And then if you can list a cross-reference, that's helpful as well. Okay. Now, also, as I mentioned earlier, I consulted the Scriptural Index of Biblical Doctrine. Okay, and in fact, let me see if I can pull that up here. I can find that. Give me a second here to look for it. I think I have it. Sorry, guys. Give me a minute. Huh. Okay, here we go. Okay, thank you for your patience. Okay, so what you want to do at this point is go to the index, the scripture index, which is going to be at near the end. My computer's running a little slow here, so just give it a minute. Uh, all right, so you're looking in biblical doctrine in the scriptural index, and here on page 981. And here, notice, let's say you're studying Proverbs 2, 1 to 8. And notice here, there's actually two references in the index to that particular passage. And so what you can do then is just simply look on these page numbers and see what it says about that reference. So I'm going to go back to page 488 and look up that reference and see what it says. Okay, 480. 46, 47. Okay, so here's 488. So I'm going to look for Proverbs chapter 2 in the references here. See if I can find it. Okay. Here we go. So notice it says here the full manifestation of that sinfulness Simpleness of human nature is restrained through the conscience, which enables the sinners to understand the difference between right and wrong. The authority of parents who teach and discipline children and the civil government. So notice here, they identify a timeless truth, and that he's talking here about restraining sin, that sin can be restrained through the conscience, and that the conscience is informed by parents who teach and discipline their children. And Proverbs 2, 1 through 5 is given as an example of that. So that's something you can include on your timeless truth. Okay? So just, I know it took me a while to get that pulled up, but that's the basic idea. Just look in that index, and then you might get some nugget, some helpful statement from within the biblical doctrines book about some particular timeless truth related to your passage. Okay? Now, when I did that for Proverbs 1, 8 through 19, let's say which one that is still up. Yeah. Okay. So when I did that step here, I consulted the scriptural index of biblical doctrines, but unfortunately for my passage, there wasn't any references there. So there may not be for you, but sometimes and often there is, and so you can look and see what the biblical doctrines book says about that. And by the way, you can do this for any systematic theology book that you might have. You can look in the index, see if your passage is mentioned there, and you may find some helpful insight on the doctrines being taught in your passage. Okay? Well, that took a whole lot of time for a very short point, but again, thank you for your patience on that. So are there any questions about this step in identifying the timeless truths? Or do you have any questions about your passage, the timeless truths in your passage that you want to ask? All right. Then I'll just keep going. Okay, and then the next step, as I mentioned earlier, the fourth step in this assignment is the reflection step. And I just put here a few thoughts, as I mentioned to you, as I reflected on the passage toward myself. And I just noted here, one of the things that came to my mind is how much do I truly depend on the Word? How much do I seek answers from Scripture to help in my life or in the ministry? I was reminded from this passage the dangers of sin and how much temptation surrounds us, and really I should put me. What are temptations that I give into? So see, there's just a lot of self-probing questions, a lot of personal thoughts, and then I also mentioned a few things that I prayed in regards to the text. So again, just put one paragraph. You don't have to put a lot of detail. Just take a few notes and write them down for this assignment. All right. Okay, hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Again, there's nothing here where you're doing interpretation. There's no sermon preparation in this step. It's more just about self-evaluation and prayer to the Lord. Okay. And then following that, the final step in this assignment is now, given all that information you have about your passage and now that you've reflected on it, is to put together that sermon concept, that sermon main point and outline. And so what you want to try to do is come up with a sermon concept that gives the main point, but does it in a short and succinct, a memorable way. All right, so I put weigh carefully wisdom's warning, okay, or heed wisdom's warning, something like that, because the nature of this passage is warning. And then my outline is Be simple, heed wisdom's call, beware sin's call, no sin's consequences. Okay? Again, short, memorable, but gives the idea of the point. And notice as well, each of these are in the imperative mood. Each of them are direction. I'm directing my hearers to do something. You don't always have to do that, but that's a helpful way to make your sermon more applicable and focused, is by making your sermon main point and your outline directed to your hearers. Okay? So I'm not going to say here, Solomon tells his son to heed wisdom's call. I'm not going to go say this. Solomon tells his son. That's an exegetical outline. That's the author's point. I'm directing this point from Solomon's statement to my hearers. So I just simply say, heed wisdom's call. Okay? So that's the difference. And basically, I just followed the outline, the stanzas in my particular passage. Okay?
Pastor Tim, the sermon concept, it seems to be the title as well.
Yeah, you could
Becomes
do
the
that.
title, the sermon concept.
Yes, that's perfectly fine.
Thank you.
In fact, that's probably helpful. If you can, that's why it's good to sort of make it short, but make sure it does include the main idea of the passage. But yeah, you can also use it for your title. And I think if my title for this sermon, I would probably just put Wisdom's Warning, because it's even shorter. And then my point would be way carefully Wisdom's Warning. Okay, good. Any other questions? How about from anyone have a question on your passage, from anything we've talked about for this assignment? This is your chance to get the answers. Okay. So that's assignment 6. What I wanted to do was not just review that assignment, but also kind of give you an update of where we're at as far as the schedule. And I talked to or messaged Pastor AJ and Pastor TJ, and they said they would be happy to host or to lead a preaching lab like you guys did before. And let me pull up the schedule here. Sorry, my word file crashed. So I had to restart it. So, okay, there we go. All right. Okay. Can you see the schedule there on your screen, guys? Okay. So here we are. The primary matters. That's what we covered today. Next week, I'm going to cover and review the sermon document. But then notice, I'm giving you a couple of weeks to get that together, and then to preach your sermon in April. And I talked to AJ and TJ about maybe during the last 2 weeks of April. So that's still a month away. Okay. So if you want to join the preaching lab, the plan is to get those scheduled toward the end of April, after Resurrection Sunday, after the Passion Week, in the latter half of April. I'll give you more details about specifically when, or if you guys want to try to coordinate something, I'll ask TJ and AJ to work with you on that. But I'd like to do it like we did last time, where several of you were able to join the preaching lab and do that together. Some of you who can't do that, you can go ahead and record your sermon like you did before and just post the link online. And that's perfectly fine as well. Okay? And what I noticed, I have the end of April as when we need to get this done, so that hopefully we can begin the next module in May. Okay? That's the
Pastor
plan
Tim,
anyway.
Pastor Tim,
Yes, sir.
I've done already my video recording and I sent it to the link.
Okay. Did you post it on Canvas?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll
And
take a look.
I've done also my sermon document in a full manuscript format
Okay.
because I have enough time to work because
That's
of this
great.
pandemic.
Excellent. Very good. I'll take a look. I'm catching up on my grading, so I'm almost caught up with everything.
And have
Okay,
mercy
so
on my grades, Pastor
what's
Tim.
that?
Have mercy on my grades.
Of course. Be merciful as I am merciful. Isn't that what God said?
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
So this is the plan. So if you could pass that along too, I'll mention it to the brothers on our Facebook Messenger group. But I'd really like to try to get the second passage done by the end of next month, and we'll see how things are. If things open up or not, it's a possibility for me to come out there to actually teach Module 4 in person. And if I do that, it may be later on, toward later in the summertime. We'll have to see about that, okay? But that'll depend on whether or not what restrictions are in place for me to travel there. But for now, let's just plan on you preaching the sermons like we did the Psalms passage, and let's see how that goes, okay?
One meeting to go.
That's right. What would you say, Usana lang?
Usa na lang.
Sana lang.
For this module. Yeah, it's been a long journey. I appreciate you guys, your diligence, and I know this has been a challenge in a lot of ways. So just stay with it. Once we get through this sermon, you're over halfway done.
Don't worry, Pastor Tim. We committed to do the job. Herman, show us the example.
Yes, you're setting the example,
Herman,
the
show
leader.
us the way.
Yeah. So, as you remember, avoid plagiarism. Yeah, avoid plagiarism. Only Pastor Tim, Pastor AJ, Brother Mel, even Pastor Jeremiah, Pastor John Piper can preach my message. Yeah.
We'll
But
remember
for
that.
those TM pastors, can you preach? But just for this month, send your tithes and offering to my church, and you can preach it as long as you can.
All right, brother.
Just kidding.
Yeah, we know. We know.
Ha? Bitaw ay. Tas bitag panahon, trabaho na to.
Well, okay.
Amen, Pas.
Does anybody have any questions or any final comments? We'll end a little bit early today.
It's okay, no problem to finish the job before the
I'm sorry, what's that?
Just include us in your prayer, Pastor Tim.
Well, Jesse, why don't
finish
you
the
pray for us?
assignment before the deadline.
Can you pray for us, Pastor Tim? A hard prayer for us.
Okay.
Please.
All right, I'll pray for you guys today. All right. Let's pray.